Save on Cox Internet when you add Cox Mobile and get fiber-powered internet at home and unbeatable 5G reliability on the go. So whether you're playing a game at home,
yes, goal,
or attending one live, you can do more without spending more. Learn how to save at cox.com/internet. Cox Internet is connected to the premises via coaxial cable. Cox Mobile runs on the network with unbeatable 5G reliability as measured by Ookla LLC in the U.S. 2H 2023. Results may vary, not an endorsement. Other restrictions apply.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
I'm Julia Turner, and this is the Slate Culture Gabfest, one of them movies about women that stuns Hollywood by being a hit edition. It's Wednesday, January 29th, 2025. Apologies to everyone last week who we informed that it was still 2024. We wish, not so. It is, in fact, 2025 and near the end of January. And on today's show, we're going to talk about the new hit film, One of Them Days, a buddy comedy from producer Issa Rae about two broke girls in South LA trying to scare up the rent. Then Asura, a new Netflix series from cult favorite Japanese director Hirokazu Kore-eda about four adult sisters in 1970s Japan and how they handle it when they discover their father has been conducting a long-term affair. Finally, the Second Trump Presidency, brought to you by YouTubers, is the title of a new package from Bloomberg that tracks the rise of the podcasting manosphere and offers an analysis of the role it may have played in electing Trump. Joining me today is Steve Metcalf. Hello, Steve.
Hello, Julia.
And in for Dana Stevens is Dan Kois. Hello, Dan.
Hello. I'm still writing 2024 on all my podcasts, too.
Yeah, well, we can pretend, I suppose. Or maybe we can't, given our third topic. All right. One of Them Days is the new One Crazy Day comedy about two Baldwin Hills roommates trying to make rent. Drew, played by the incandescent Keke Palmer, is the responsible one, striving for a manager role at the diner where she works. And Alyssa, played by musician SZA in her first film role, is the woo-woo artist whose space cadet antics keep getting the duo into trouble. Directed by Lawrence Lamont and written by Sarita Singleton, the film snuck into theaters a couple weeks ago and has earned $25 million domestically, outperforming expectations by far. Before we dive in, let's listen to a clip. Drew and Alyssa are left trying to make rent because Alyssa's well-endowed but otherwise worthless boyfriend has stolen their rent money and invested it in an ill-conceived t-shirt line. They start their efforts to scare up the cash by the end of the day at a payday lender, where here we hear the loan officer, played by Kayla Monteroso Mejia, marvel at the girls' low credit scores.
I'm an artist. I paint nails, houses, inner, outer, some other shit, but I thought you give loans to anybody.
Yeah, anybody with some proof of income.
I do work at a diner. I'm a waitress. I make a steady paycheck. Full disclosure, my credit score is currently Are you having a heart attack?
I've never seen a credit score this low.
You got problems.
You guys are old. Way too old not to understand how credit works.
Yes. You're denied. You're void.
Let's
go.
I'm gonna kick your ass.
Let's go.
I think you can get a little sense of the tone of the film in that clip. Another piece of information that comes out in that scene is that part of why Drew's credit score is so low is that she started but did not complete business school. And I think that scene captures sort of the economic uncertainty that is the through line of this film. And Steve, I wondered if you would agree that it's fair to call this like the first housing crisis comedy, or at least the first one I've seen. It seems like a housing crisis comedy.
Well, let me begin by saying unequivocally, I loved this movie. It took me about 10 minutes to warm up. Funnily enough, we just played the scene that got me fully warm. The actress playing the loan officer is hysterically funny. That scene is just nailed. Every one of them is very, very funny.
Did you, just briefly, Steve, did you watch the season of Curb Your Enthusiasm that that actress is in? She's hilarious. She's, through a series of plot contraptions I won't get too far into, Larry is forced to cast her in a project and she can't act at all, and she's a total tyrant with her non-acting, and like and he can't fire her or else blah 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 blah. And like, if you liked this performance, it's worth going and watching that season because she's incredible.
Yeah, I now I want to. I mean, we should say her name again, Kayla Monterosa Mejia, and she's unbelievably funny. I'm also a huge fan of SZA. My kids play all kinds of pop music in the car that I'm unfamiliar with. Every time a SZA song comes on, I'm like, who is that? Who is that? And so now, like, SZA's all over my playlists. She's terrific in this movie. She's a natural on screen. She brings a tremendous amount of charisma and humor to the part. I would just have sat there and watched these two women interacting with each other for hours. It's a very, very funny buddy movie taking place, over the course of a single day. Right. So it nails that genre. To me, the direction of the social commentary really is less generic than like the housing crisis or the broken social contract with people under the age of, let's call it 40 or whatever. And it was just, this is quintessentially a movie about Black women and the relationship of Black women to one another in a society that depends utterly on their labor and their, essentially like their virtue, and then does nothing but degrade and ignore them. And that meant that both the comedy was laced with a real trenchancy, and the relationship was laced with an incredible pathos and beauty. And I thought it was thereby not just a buddy movie, but a movie about like courage and solidarity and friendship in ways that were quite weirdly powerful. And it's incredibly smart, funny movie disguised as something a little bit throwaway. And I really hope people discover it. And the two leads are just transcendently funny and true.
Steve, I think what you're saying about, the role that Black women, that this movie is arguing play in society, is both true and a little bit beside the point with this movie. Like, it's true of Keke Palmer's character. It's true of Drew, who is shown again and again to be like an extremely competent, ambitious, dedicated person who clearly makes the diner where she works run, who clearly sort of is like an animating force within the jungle, that apartment building that they live in. But then you also have SZA's character, upon whom nothing depends, who is not the backbone of anything sort of by choice. And she's like a great buddy comedy archetype, the sort of dreamy artist type who doesn't quite believe in herself,
right?
But who holds within her sort of flaky delightfulness the key to unlocking this whole problem.
Absolutely, Dan. Now remake the movie as a movie featuring two white women. What's that character like in that whiteified movie? She believes in herself from the beginning.
Right.
We believe in her from the beginning, and she's not getting fucked over by a no-account boyfriend through the first 2/3 of the movie. This is all about how SZA's character has no self-image coincident with her self-worth. Right. That's the dynamic, and that has everything to do with how this society teaches Black women to value themselves, I thought. Julie, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I really love this movie too, and thought the performances were great, and the sort of wisdom of it was great. It's interesting. There is a little bit of a Trojan horse quality because the subjects that it's about these women and their self-worth and just the economic instability. I mean, even just that throwaway detail of like this ambitious woman started business school and she couldn't finish it and it was too expensive. And now that effort at forward motion is actually part of what's holding her back because her credit score is so absurd because of having tried to, it's like, what's wrong with higher education? What's wrong with housing? And there's just a sense of bleakness underlying it, which like I do not recall being super present in Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle, like there's a, like there is a, unusual melody that is happening because of the structure of this like goofy friend hijinks familiar Hollywood template butted up against this clear-eyed not it's interesting. It's not like a furious movie. It's sort of a resigned, wise, this is how it is movie, you know? But the eye of the movie on the society and the world that the women find themselves in is really sophisticated. And the combination of those two things, it makes it kind of unlike anything I'd really seen before. I mean, I also saw it, for all of this movie is a much bigger success than was expected. I did see it like on a Monday matinee with 2 people in the theater. Maybe it was two groups in the theater, 4 people in the theater. You know, so I didn't get to see it in like a laugh out loud, you know, Friday night crowd. And maybe it would have struck me as more wildly comedic if I had. It seemed a little like it's not quite laugh a minute, even though there are many hilarious moments within it.
I think it is really instructive to think about this movie in comparison with something like Harold and Kumar, where those 2 characters come from from minority populations, from traditionally disadvantaged populations, but the characters themselves have made it, right? Like Harold and Kumar are successful within their realms. The struggle of the movie is that they're pushing back against that success and want to reject it in some way. You know, a typical, we got to solve a problem in one day buddy comedy like Dude, Where's My Car? Foregrounds characters who, you know, basically are going to be fine no matter what comes at them. And so one of the real differences between this movie and one of those is that it's still funny and it's still lighthearted, but the stakes are just way higher than they are for any of the characters in those movies. Like there's the problems these women face start with losing their apartment and not having any way to get any other place to live, and only get worse from there. And that both, I think you're right, Julia, makes this a little bit less than a laugh a minute, in part because we can never shake those stakes, but also makes the movie, as you say, Steve, more moving and more trenchant because the friendship and the dedication that they have to each other is in the face of so much more real peril and real struggle. And I too found that really moving, even as I found that on a minute-to-minute basis, I was not laughing as much as I did during like a Harold and Kumar.
Well, the film is one of them days. It's out in theaters. You should go check it out.
Here's a little tip for all the music fans out there. Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide. You heard right, 99%. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back, which means you could earn rewards for those almost front row seats, ride shares to the venue, even that concert merch you've had your eye on since it dropped. If all of that sounds like music to your ears, remember, it pays to discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/credit card.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Because Progressive offers discounts for paying in full, owning a home, and more. Plus, you can count on their great customer service to help you when you need it, so your dollar goes a long way. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save on car insurance. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states and situations.
All right, on to Asura, a 7-episode series from Japanese director Hirokazu Kore-eda, perhaps best known here in America for his film Shoplifters. The series is set in 1970s Japan and tracks 4 sisters as they discover their dad's long-term infidelity and wrestle with their own relationships and the question of what they, as women, are entitled to. Just to get a sense of the tone of the show, we're going to play a snippet from the trailer. Here you can hear younger sister Takiko explaining what she has hired a private investigator to uncover about their father. The actress's name is Yu Aoi.
お父さん、面倒見てる人いるのよ。子供は男の子で小学校2年生。もしかしたら私たちの兄弟よ。お母さんに知られる前に何とかしたいのよ。男と女、 逆にすればそんなに珍しいことじゃないわよ。
One thing I like about that snippet is that the musical tone does persist throughout the series, and we can come back around to the way that it uses music, I think. But Dan, I'd love to start with you here. What did you make of this series? What appealed to you about it?
So we're all in agreement, right, that this is the age of TV. TV has equaled or surpassed movies and artistry. TV is where it's at. TV is where the real artists go. There's no one cares anymore if movie directors make TV shows or Hollywood stars make TV shows. And this series is like totally beautifully acted and wonderfully shot and really well written. And it had the unexpected effect of reactivating my snobbery about TV and movies. I found it, while watching the show, I found it a real drag that this is how Kore-eda has been spending his time to make a 7-episode Netflix series that Netflix then instantly buried and no one will watch. I found it embarrassing that he had to come up with like a title sequence with a bunch of slow motion shots of his actresses throwing things at the camera, and then he had to cut a trailer with like that jaunty music. I just wished that this was just a regular movie that I could sit through and enjoy and not a 7-episode series. And I'm not sure exactly why. I think it has something to do. I do think that he has, in a way that's maybe admirable, basically refused to modify his aesthetic technique or the rhythm of his storytelling in any way for television. Like each episode of this show seemed to me like a perfectly lovely, very nice, more or less complete 1-hour film. And then it did none of the TV work of like pushing me to smash that button to watch the next episode. It seemed totally uninterested in any of the rhythms of television in a way that is both like good for him. Why should he? But also why then is the way that he gets to make things apparently by getting money from Netflix and making things that don't feel like TV shows.
Was it that it didn't feel like a TV show or that it felt too much like a TV show? Like, do you wish it were tighter?
No, I just wish it was an hour and a half long, moving at this exact rhythm, telling a complete story and not requiring of me a 7-hour investment to get to the end of a thing that is still moving at Kore-eda movie pace, which is to say, scenes happen when they happen, and he's interested in the interesting little things that people do, and he doesn't really care about cliffhangers or suspense or reversals or reveals. He just wants to like explore what these people are doing.
Interesting. I mean, there was one scene of a woman peeling an apple slowly that did seem a little bit long, but I was a lot more wrapped up in this, I think, than it sounds like you were. Steve, break the tie. What did you make of this series?
Yeah, I mean, there's this long history like Decalogue, Franny and Alexander of film directors making television series and accomplish something in a serial format that they can't in a 90-minute, 2-hour format, which like Dan, I really admire for its economy of storytelling. I mean, it's a real art to be able to do that. But this is a different kind of art. And because, Bergman's work in the medium, for example, preceded streaming TV by a generation, there's a precedent for having it be cinematic in its pacing and its payoffs. I really like this. I deeply admire it. I don't think I connected with the pilot. I needed to stick with it longer. I found the pilot a little frenetic and a little hard to follow and to lose myself to. Basically, the sort of jauntiness of the music had its corollary in a kind of slightly pitched acting style and pace that didn't work for me, but it settled into itself in the second episode. There's a moment that involves fogging a piece of glass that had a real beauty and whimsy to it. I was already sort of hooked by then, but that one was, I swooned for completely. And now I'm 2.5 hours or so, 3 hours in, I'm completely invested in the story of these sisters. Something we haven't mentioned that I think is critical to this show is it takes place in 1979. It's a period piece. It's very much about the living memory of a pre-1945 Japan existing in the parent generation. The parents' generation plays a huge part in what these sisters are going through. Julia, as you say, the father's infidelity is both shocking and not shocking to the daughters in ways that are fascinating. But it's clearly about a moment in which the memory of however you want to put it, imperial Japan, feudal Japan, whatever you want to call the pre-1945 remnant, is about to disappear. It hasn't been reborn in this new generation, or if it has, it's in an attenuated form. And their manners and mores, sexually speaking especially, and gender relationships are going to are undergoing a change for which they don't have a vocabulary. I mean, to me, this is a brilliant study of a moment in which the formalities, the sort of outer forms of social existence, don't answer to the inner reality of social existence anymore. And so people don't know how to speak or act exactly. And these sisters need to reach for a new way of thinking and talking about their relationships with their parents and with men. It seems to me that's what this show is dedicated to in a way. You wouldn't like it if it were dedicated to something as bloodless as the thesis that I've just offered, but it isn't bloodless. It's very, very beautifully shot, as Dan says. And as the sisters begin to individuate vis-a-vis one another, you lose yourself to their company, I think. So I'm very, very invested in this show. It's the one thing I think I'm going to be committed to watching over the next week or 10 days.
Well, and the other thing that's implicit in that time, late 70s timing, is sort of the eve of Japanese dominance as a global business power, which is very much subtextual in it, but very much in it, I think, sort of the transformation in the society. I think I really love this because the portrait of adult sisters and what your relationship is as an adult sibling to the family in which you were raised is just so deftly and beautifully done. Like the relationship between them and among them, the squabbling, the disputes, the disappointments, the kind of underlying, just enduring closeness beneath it all, even as they disagree or debate about how close they are, or how much time they spend together. There aren't a ton of portraits of adult siblinghood in general. It's like not a very frequent subject, right? And I loved seeing it and seeing kind of the familiarity of that, the universality of that, juxtaposed with this incredibly precise cultural context and historical context that is not my own, and sort of the beauty of that juxtaposition I found really arresting and interesting. And it definitely moseys with its pace, but I didn't find it slow. I mean, I think, you want to be watching it in Japanese with the subtitles, which means it's not a second screen show. And I do think sometimes shows that it wants you to watch through subtitles benefit from Americans style plot hijinks and pacing, where you don't feel that that urge to look at your phone. But I didn't, despite the fact that this is kind of magisterial and mysterious in certain ways. I just felt very absorbed by it and really loved it. And I think part of what makes it so absorbing is that the sisters are not types. Like the sisters are so precisely drawn, actually, as you get to know them. I think my favorite is Sakiko, one of the younger sisters, who's kind of the most modern and most kind of disinclined to observe the social mores of the past in a lot of ways, seemingly, and then turns out to be just stubbornly particular in her own relationships and desires, and actually kind of conservative. She's dating this like no good boxer, and yet in the privacy of their relationship, we see that she's like relentlessly hounding him to be a champion boxer because she actually does want the respect of her family and society, and she wants to be the partner of a successful boxer and not unsuccessful boxer. And she's kind of a jerk to him and he's a jerk to her. Like, it's just an interesting, specific relationship. And in some ways she's the most conservative because she wants to be the consort to a successful man, like even as she's sort of wearing more contemporary seeming clothes and doesn't seem that interested in some of the traditional practices, she's not the one who shows up to her mother's house to help pickle cabbage the old-fashioned way.
I also love Sakiko. I would buy every single outfit that Sakiko wears and distribute them to my children to wear them in the modern day because everything she wears is amazing. My favorite of the sisters is Makiko, the second oldest. She's played by Michiko Ono, who's an actress I don't think I've seen before in anything, though she's been in a couple of con movies. She's the only one of the four sisters who is currently married and a mom. And what I love about that character, she's the one who most easily could have been a type. But like the other ones, as you say, Julia, is not a type. And Michiko Ono doesn't play her as a type. She doesn't play her as like even a traditional 1970s Japanese housewife, which is a really specific mode in Japanese film of the time and media of the time. But she's really spiky. She argues with her husband a lot, even as she serves him. She's obviously sick of her children, even as she serves them. And she really takes the initiative in this like dilemma that's facing these four sisters about their father and trying to figure it out, and in ways that often just end up like making it worse, and which I also really enjoyed.
Yeah, exactly right, Dan. This is a study in how personhood exceeds the social roles allotted to it. And over and over again, we see that in all these instances, specifically at a moment where the role model of the female parent is unusable. They love their mother and respect her and are quite worried for her, given the infidelity of their father. But at the same time, she's not a workable role model going forward for a modern or contemporary Japanese woman. And I love that there is, to the point that I've watched, unless I'm misreading it, there's a mystery about what the mother knows. And does the mother know or not know about her husband is a really fascinating question. And has she decided to metabolize and cope with it in order to keep up appearances? Is that dignified, or is that a horrible compromise? All of these strike me to the point that I've watched as live questions and make what could have been a stock character into something, really quite human and relatable.
All these themes, I agree, are totally interesting. And all these characters are well individuated and beautifully acted. And yet, to me, none of this stuff has been like dramatically activated in the way that I need something to be dramatically activated to get me through a 7-episode television series. They still, to me, seem like the kinds of themes that in a movie you can explore leisurely and measuredly, while sort of taking us through a gentle plot in a way that doesn't bother me, but that when you're sitting me in front of my TV and asking me to press play next episode, it doesn't compel me yet.
Dan, you don't have to answer the question. The witness is not instructed to answer the question. How much of this have you watched?
3 episodes.
That's funny. And you're not in. You're not hooked.
I am to the point where if this had been the whole experience I'd had, I would have been like, that was a great 2.5-hour movie that I am happy I spent time with. But when you turn it into a Netflix series, for some reason, it makes me think, why am I being made to keep affirmatively saying I want to watch this?
All right. Well, I'm going to wrap us here. The series is Asura. It's 7 episodes. It's on Netflix from Hirokazu Kore-eda. Let us know what you think. Too much? Too long? Perfect amount? And I do, after the 3rd episode, it does jump forward in time in a way that, I don't know, maybe we can dangle that in front of you, Dan, and see if it piques your interest.
Like one of them is like, we have to go back to the island.
Exactly. They're going to check the manifest.
Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, Enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Since you're new to H&R Block, we'll look at your returns from the last 3 years for any money your last guy might have missed for free.
I could get money back from last year?
You could. We'll find any mistakes.
Could have really used that 2 years ago when I dated that mistake for 5 months.
Don't leave money on the table. Switch to H&R Block and get a free Second Look review. Second Look is included at no additional cost with the purchase of tax preparation. Results vary. All tax situations are different. Fees apply if you have us file an amended return.
Last week, Bloomberg published The Second Trump Presidency, brought to you by YouTubers, an analysis by 7 reporters of the male podcast Osphere on YouTube and what exactly it was discussing in the years running up to Trump's reelection and how it might have influenced young men in particular to vote for Donald Trump. This is one of those packages that started making noise in my feeds and among the newsletters I follow and everywhere else in a way that editorial packages don't make so much noise anymore. It's hard for a package to make noise. And I think there was a sense that this project exposed or put its finger on or helped people who are not in the YouTube podcastosphere understand or comprehend or feel what exactly this cultural trend is in a new way. So we wanted to tackle it and discuss it. And I'm very excited to be discussing it with my 2 favorite avatars of modern American masculinity, Dan Kois and Steve Metcalf. I'll start with you, Steve. Did you find this to be illuminating? Did this help you understand where a portion of male American culture is in new ways?
I think it's a pound the table must read. I did learn things that I didn't know, but only up to a certain point. As to why men are seeking this kind of solace, that is the question I think we're going to be asking for the next 4 or maybe 100 years. What is it in a super affluent, otherwise in many ways highly successful, highly functional society? What happened to make the single most entitled demographic group, white men, feel imperiled, feel their masculinity was imperiled, and why that became a politically and commercially exploitable fact is such a huge question. Bloomberg can't get to it. I'm sure 10 sociologists couldn't get to it. It's going to take all of us thinking for decades to really puzzle that one out. But to the extent one wants to understand what the specific YouTube dominant sort of Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson like space online is like, as it conduced obviously to the election of Trump, this was indispensable. I mean, among the many interesting observations after sifting through, I guess it was thousands of hours, certainly hundreds of hours of this material on our behalf, is that much of it is ostensibly non-political. Like all of it is gendered. It's like overwhelmingly gendered. Something like 12% of the guests on these shows are women. So the programming is ultimately by men and for men with a kind of emphasis on young men, though I guess young has a slightly shifting definition, but its effect is very powerful on men under the age of 30. And so a lot of the content is about, just sort of bro lifestyle, but laced in it are a surprising consistency of political talking points, which raises my suspicious hackles, right? Like, why is it so consistently the case that when politics come up, they come up according to a set of seemingly highly scripted, pre-scripted talking points? So it is a way of delivering a worldview to a voting population that either is a low propensity voter, a low information news follower, and under the age of 30 is not at all, or traditionally has not at all been a reliable Republican or conservative voice or vote. And it seems to have worked, right? Biden won in 2020, young men under the age of 30, men under the age of 30, he lost them. And that trend seems to be only going in this particular direction.
Dan, did you find this revelatory or surprising?
It made me think a lot about my own version of manhood and how little it resonates with the version of manhood that I see and hear in these podcasts that this manosphere represents, as Steve says, this version of bro culture that dovetails perfectly with, you know, the white male fear of being replaced, that Trump and the Republican Party are so expertly catering to. And there are all kinds of things to think about the way that this is a catastrophe for the country. It also seemed to me to be like a catastrophe for an idea of manhood. Like, there was a brief period when I felt like the idea of manhood that I recognized and that I was striving for was like reflected and accepted in the popular culture, like maybe a 5-year window, like this little window between being yelled at by jocks in high school and then being out-earned by tech bros after I graduated from college. And then all of a sudden, like, kind, gentle, normal guy manhood was like, okay, right when I became a dad, all of a sudden it was fine. But then now we're back and the jocks and the bros have taken over once again. And their idea of manhood is like straight out of an 80s teen movie. And like the idea that these specific kinds of assholes have found yet a different way to win just totally bums me out.
I mean, they found a way to be influential. I really responded to the editorial craft of this project. Like, I'm obviously aware of this trend. We did Joe Rogan's show as a topic, like, I don't know, 2 years ago when he was in a fight with Spotify about something and attempted to listen to a bunch of Joe Rogan episodes, which they're so long and it's such a massive body of work that we barely skimmed the surface. It was almost like when we do segments sometimes about video games where we just are only able to get to the barest minimum of it. And I thought that a lot of this was very effective, particularly in how they pulled clips and just gave you, like, in a very easy to use way on the website, just ways to hear 15 to 30 seconds of like, what is the wallpaper that is in so many people's ears. And it brought to life that reality without forcing me to go be like, well, why don't I listen to a bunch of Theo Von episodes? Like, I don't want to do that. Like, that's not actually what I want to listen to when I'm washing dishes, which means that I remain kind of ignorant of what that space is. So I thought, just in terms of, it's very difficult to cover podcasts because people talk so much and so long, and which parts are you clipping? And the way that they used the little video clips, I thought was very effective. They also talked a little bit about their methodology. They chose shows above a certain listener threshold that had Trump on, that had largely male audiences, according to some metric. I was a little uncertain exactly quite how they arrived at this set. They described it, but I wonder, and maybe that's actually a virtuous effect of the package, maybe wonder a bit about the shows around the periphery of these shows. And then it also made me think about a media ecosystem that just means you can put a lot of stuff in your ears that is not true and not have any signals that it isn't. And in fact, presents as a virtue the fact that it's telling you a deeper truth that other people are keeping from you, right? So we can listen to maybe a clip here from the Lex Fridman podcast, which is sort of one of the wonkier ones. There are definitely some kind of more goofy influencer bro ones. But there's a Lex Fridman podcast clip that has Tucker Carlson on talking about the 2020 election. And it's useful, I think, to just hear like how low information voters, what they're hearing in their ears.
Said to some degree the election was rigged.
100% stolen. Are you joking?
It was rigged to that large of a degree.
They completely change the way people vote right before the election on the basis of COVID, which had nothing to do
so in that way it was rigged, meaning
100%.
Like
and then
manipulated.
Then you censor the information people are allowed to get. Anyone who complains about COVID, which is like, by the way, it might have hurt Trump. But I mean, it's like, whatever. I mean, you could play it many different ways.
What seems important to me, though, is not just that clip is like a little nugget of information that's delivered to a person listening to this podcast, but that it's embedded in a 2-hour show, which itself is embedded in this ecosystem that the Bloomberg package demonstrates of 2-hour show after 2-hour show after 3-hour show after 5-hour show. And so that the people who are listening to these it seems to have become like the air that they breathe, the water that they swim in, are these long discussions between people, which, as the package shows, as the election approached, became more and more studded with political content, but nevertheless are still not fundamentally about politics, or rather are about a version of culture and manhood that has become inextricably tied to a certain kind of politics. And so the package succeeded in drawing these connections, and in particular, the graphics I thought were even more useful than the clips, and showing me the ways that these podcasts had evolved in what they discussed and who they booked. But also it can never replicate or even describe what it's like to be a person who is listening to these 7 or 8 or 9 hours a day, or 15 or 20 hours a week, in the same way that we can't really understand what it's like to be someone who has Fox News on in their house 11 hours a day, and to just have that be constantly fed into your cerebral cortex.
Right. And it exactly right. It's like an immersion experience where the boundaries between your own life and, media consumption are blurred because the AirPods are in your ears, you're mowing the lawn or whatever. But, it's funny. The one of the few Malcolm Gladwell pieces from back in the heyday that I think back on, before he became Malcolm Inc., was the one about Dockers and the ad campaign. It led off with, I think, how successful the ad campaign in the 90s for Dockers had been, which, if you recall, it shot a bunch of men. I think they were shooting pool or hanging out. I mean, there were a series of them, but only from the waist down. And so you only saw the Dockers pants. But what you heard was their camaraderie. And the point that Gladwell made about the marketers behind it is their research showed that the largest felt deficit in many men's lives, or at least the demographic that might buy a pair of Dockers pants, was a lack of male camaraderie, a specific form of loneliness and social loneliness, that hanging out with the guys was the thing that kind of ends when a lot of people leave either high school or college or the early part of their lives. And to answer to that specific, highly non-political, but deeply felt deficit in a way that then reshapes that into a political or politically exploitable sentiment is to my mind deeply sinister. I mean, it's very cunning, if nothing else, but I think sinister. And it places an enormous burden on those of us who'd like to push back on illiberalism. Do we lean into it, which was sort of the Kamala campaign? I mean, by necessity, she, I think, kind of had to be the nominee, and highly gender it back and basically try to cobble together a winning coalition, or more dominantly cultural coalition, of people who find the jocks and who just don't want a wedgie. They don't want, to be caught in a decades long wedgie for the rest of their lives. Or do you try to speak to that loneliness and that sense of having been somehow forsaken, even though the mentality behind it is massively entitled? So it's, and do you fact check them? Because the instant you fact check them, you're the nanny, you're the scold, you're the castrating marm. It's like it forces a horrible dilemma on those of us who'd like to say, actually, that's not factually correct, Tucker, because then all of a sudden you're all the things these people hate.
Right. The sort of secret truth and the just asking questions. So you guys are both stipulated as Mitt Romney approved fathers of daughters. But maybe I should speak here for a minute as a mother of sons, because I do have some sense, like I can imagine, and knowing some young men who are older than my sons, like the last 10 years have been the question of what's your value as a young man. And a lot of the listeners to these shows are white, but as we saw, young men of all demographics voted for Trump in this election. And actually, this package does not spend a ton of time on race or ethnicity. It does talk about how immigration is one of the topics that that seems to resonate for this group. But I do, the sense of like what is my place and what is my value for young men has been a little uncertain for the last 10 years, in part because of a lot of social changes that have been to the good. I have some sympathy for. And I'm curious to go back to something you said earlier, Dan, about that 5-year window when it felt like being a kind, kind, gentle, normal manhood was approved. What was it that made you feel culturally that was ascendant or dominant or the prevailing male mode? Like which 5 years were those years, and what was it that seemed to give broader social permission for that?
Maybe I'm imagining them, but it did seem like there's a period in which maybe it's like the just immediately post Apatow, like thoughtful guys who had in fact embraced manhood as opposed to resisting it could be the heroes of books or movies or TV shows. Now, naturally, none of these are immediately springing to mind, but like this sense that alongside the kind of revolutions in the way we thought about race and gender, it required a certain kind of guy to understand, appreciate, and accept those revolutions and indeed welcome them. That there was like a role for a guy who wanted to be on the right side of history to play. And maybe what it all comes down to is that for a very brief period, it was like socially acceptable and even advantageous to market yourself as a male feminist in a way that Christina Cauterucci, for example, in Slate has like expertly dissected, and in a way that has totally now fallen apart. And as like hokey and opportunistic as that was, it nevertheless was like somewhat inspirational for someone like me who did indeed want to find a way to experience and live manhood that did not depend on like the subjugation of other people. And so to see that essentially fade away alongside, the ascendance of a version of manhood that does depend on declaring the supremacy of white manhood is like super depressing. And, new, freshly minted Slate podcast host Kate Lindsay in her old life has written a lot about the quote unquote gentle guy internet, which does exist, which is like the antithesis of the manosphere as it's presented in this Bloomberg piece, and is in fact in many ways robust. Like there are a lot of places on the internet, because the internet is enormous and serves all audiences. There are places on the internet that are, as she says, like the stuff that your nice boyfriend just watches on his phone that doesn't turn him into a raving maniac, but just like caters to his interests that are about like camping or hiking or interesting new bands or like beard care. But it does not get monetized or algorithmized in the way that the manosphere has or does, for reasons that are presumably structural and tech driven. But for whatever reason, that is not the driving cultural force now, even though we're still out there and we exist.
Yeah. My favorite videos that my sons watch are just videos about flags. They know a lot about flags, and they're constantly learning more about flags from YouTube.
And YouTube has not yet directed them into a long treatise about how the American flag has been taken over by the woke left, and the only real American flag has a thin blue line on it.
They don't have a ton of unfettered access to YouTube, but they have a little bit more than I wish they did. But then when I see what they're watching, it's still flag content, and I find very heartening. So
great.
Although I suppose an interest in flags is easily convertible to an interest in nationalisms of various sorts. So this space bears watching. But the package is the Second Trump Presidency, brought to you by YouTubers. It's really worth your time. I know a lot of folks are in kind of news avoidance mode at the moment. I weirdly am finding myself more interested lately, even if it is incredibly jarring and distressing to follow what happens in any given day at the moment. But I would recommend that people check this series out. And I would recommend that kind, gentle, normal men keep doing their thing out there in the world. You're not alone.
Thank you all for indulging my perma crisis.
At Verizon, anyone can trade in their old phone for a new one on us with Unlimited Ultimate, which means everyone in your family could get a new phone and stay on your family plan, keeping you close.
Hey, Mom, you seen my toothbrush? Yeah, I'm almost done with it.
Oh, maybe too close. Trade in and additional terms apply. See Verizon.com for details.
All right, Steve, business time.
Yeah, this is where we discuss business. Our one item is that we have a Slate Plus bonus episode available to Slate Plus members in their feeds. Today, the three of us, Dan, Julia, and I, will give our thoughts on title sequences. What do they say about how we watch TV in the streaming age, and how a good one can make or break a show as a whole? Does it add to it or detract to it? Opinions vary. If you're not a Slate Plus member, I have some words for you. That's not going to cut it. Let's get it together. Let's sign up. Let's support quality journalism in this show. Please sign up today at slate.com/culture+. Members get ad-free podcasts, lots of bonus content like the Slate Plus segment I just alluded to. You also get to hear members-only programming on other Slate shows like Slow Burn and the Political Gabfest. And members get unlimited access to all the great writing on slate.com. You'll never hit a paywall if you're a Slate Plus member. I should also mention that you'll be supporting our work and the work of our brilliant colleagues. Journalism is in danger, as are all good things in a liberal democracy. Please support them and us. These memberships are really important. They're lifeblood, really, honestly, to us in Slate. Please sign up today at slate.com/culture+. Again, that's slate.com/culture+. Or subscribe now on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page. There is another item of business this week. Julia, what's that?
Yeah, it's a bittersweet one for reasons that we will hear more about in our endorsements session. But we just want to announce to you all that we are hiring. We are looking for a production assistant once again. This is a super important role for us, and one that's been filled by a ton of talented people who've ended up in marvelous places all over the podcast verse and the journalism verse in years past. We're looking for someone to come up with ideas for topics, join our planning calls every week, and then create research packets to help us prepare for the recordings. The job takes about 10 to 15 hours a week. It is paid and the location is flexible. And we've found in the past that the very best people at it are people who know this show well, which is why we are reaching out to all of you. So if this sounds interesting to you, please send us an email at culturegabfestassistant@gmail.com with the subject line PA. And in the email, tell us why you're interested, why you think you'd be good, and send us 2 ideas for topics that you think we should discuss in the coming weeks. Now is the moment in our show when we endorse Dan. Noah, what have you got?
Speaking of manhood,
as we do,
I'm endorsing a really good, really enthralling new novel called Playworld by Adam Ross. It is set in 1980. It tracks a year in the life of a 14-year-old young man, a child actor in Manhattan, as he tries to make weight for wrestling matches. He's a high school wrestler, as he designs his own D&D campaign, as he also acts in a movie with Jill Clayburgh and Sissy Spacek, as he watches his parents' marriage fall apart. And then also, on top of all that, as he submits to the affections of the wife of one of his dad's best friends. It's one of those like big, ambitious coming-of-age novels. It's, beautifully written. It's very funny. It's very perceptive. It's also a little hair-raising about teenagerhood in a particularly unparented era. It's also pretty hair-raising about manhood and what manhood entails. Anyways, I loved it. Great book. Playworld by Adam Ross. You will fall right into it.
That does sound good. All right. Steve, what you got?
A couple things. One is that I fear that I mortally offended my Melburnian hosts by endorsing a Sydney restaurant. I want to clarify that was Bush, the restaurant that I endorsed, was my favorite meal in Sydney. But overall, my favorite meal was north of Melbourne and what was kind of the Hudson Valley-ish in terms of the social makeup of it. It's like where you go if you want to drive 2 hours and get out of the city of Melbourne into the countryside, but still have a countrypolitan vibe area around the town. Dilesford, a restaurant called Bar Miranda. I know this is insane to be endorsing things in Australia, but I just wanted to be clear that Bar Miranda was by far the most like enthralling kind of hangout food wine experience I've had in ages. But that aside, what I'm
Wait. Before you go do that, I just like the idea that that's going to be your endorsements for the next month. Is like then the people you saw in Perth are going to be like, well, what about our coffee bar? And then the people from Canberra are going to be like, our nation's capital demands your...
The people in the Hudson Valley of Melbourne are like, we're not the Hudson Valley. We're much more like Napa.
We're like the Napa, yeah.
You're on to me. But no, I'm going to terminate it there. No, that can't happen because my Melburnian hosts, the Brian Lair of Melbourne was my host. Raph Epstein, he's an institution in the town of Melbourne, and his wife Melissa hosted us for 2 weeks, and like there are no equivalents anywhere in my travel existence. Period. So it ends there. That's the last of my Australia endorsements, but. I'm endorsing an essay very quickly. It's on the Poetry Foundation website, For the Love of the World. It's about Hannah Arendt's love of poetry and why that has so much to do with her thinking. To the extent Hannah Arendt comes to us as a meaningful thinker now, especially it's because of her brilliant take on authoritarian and totalitarian forms of oppression and governance, pseudo-governance. But one of the reasons I think this essay argues quite beautifully that one of the reasons why she was able to see authoritarian government in its true nature is because it was inimical to something larger than politics, i.e. life and our relationship to simply being mysterious creatures in the world, endowed with consciousness and feelings in ways that no theory can quite capture, but poetry can gesture towards mimetically. And therefore, it's on behalf of something larger than politics that we are forced to do politics, in part to prevent being governed by people who are inimical to the aims of a meaningful and flourishing life. But so anyway, I thought it was a beautiful essay. No theory can capture human experience. That's why we have poets. For the Love of the World by, I'm going to probably mispronounce his name, Deegan Miller, I think, spelled Daegan. Actually, I don't know what gender they are, but please read it. It's a beautiful piece of writing.
That sounds great. All right. Well, we've got a very special guest endorsement this week from our longtime production assistant, Kat Hong, who is leaving the show after years of marvelous service. To the degree that you've enjoyed what we've talked about or the insights we've shared with you over the last couple of years, it is due in great part to Kat and her wonderful research and intriguing topic suggestions and her general wisdom and assistance and savoir-faire. So, Kat, we're going to miss you so much, and we are hopeful that you will share an endorsement as a parting shot with our listeners.
Oh, thank you, Julia. First, I just want to say, this has been truly a joy for me. I've mentioned to the host, but I have been a fan of the show for 10 years, about a decade. And I started listening to the show in college when I was starting to do a podcast sort of specialty, I guess. And I just never stopped listening. When I was studying abroad, like I listened to my first summer strut. Like it's just been such a joy to also know that the hosts and the team behind the show are also just as great and wonderful and smart and charming as they are on air. And so I'm going to miss being on the show as well. But yeah, I have my little endorsement, which is called Calmly Writer, but specifically the online version. I believe it's a app that you can either download for free or buy. It's a markdown writer. I am very weird and particular about the kinds of note-taking apps or like physical papers that I write on. And so I was looking for something when I transitioned from a Mac to a Chromebook, which was kind of intense as someone who is on the Apple ecosystem, but I wanted something kind of akin to like a sticky note on Mac where I could just sort of write down my thoughts and just put it somewhere and it not be complicated. I don't want to do formatting because I get too weird about formatting and I need it to be like the perfect font, and that consumes too much of my daily life. So I needed something very streamlined and simple. And so the online version, which is just like a website, I believe, like is a clean slate, no pun intended, of a blank page that you can just fill, with notes and everything. And it's very simple. And there's no, it's marked down. So there's no formatting on the actual page itself. And so that is calmlywriter.com.
All right. I will check it out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that and for everything, Kat.
Of course. Thanks. I'm going to miss you guys. And I'll still be listening.
Yeah, we're going to miss you. You were one of the greats, Kat. Thanks for everything.
True. You go in the pantheon for sure.
Wow. Name the other names. Just kidding.
That's for drinks after.
That's the plus segment.
Indeed. All right. Well, my endorsement today is in honor of being back in our home in LA. And we had the nicest, coziest, laziest weekend of just like bumming around at home, doing home things, which involved making cookies, and I made black eyed peas and declared a reset on 2025. I declared January 27th, the actual first day of 2025. So don't worry, guys. All the luck is going to change thanks to these black eyed peas I made. But one of the things we did was make some cookies from a wonderful cookbook called Crumbs by Ben Mims, who's a former colleague of mine at the Los Angeles Times and a recipe developer. And he's written a beautiful book about the cookies of the world. And it's organized by region and then by country. And then in each country, you see an interesting cookie and how to make it. And I sometimes feel like there are cookies that are there are cookbooks that are about the culture of food, and they're fun to read, but you don't necessarily want to make the recipes. And then there are cookbooks that are like, this recipe is going to work no matter what, but you don't necessarily get the context. And this really seems like both. Like it's both interesting, but then at least based on this first recipe we tried, the recipe was simple, clearly made, worked like clockwork. We made a Swedish cookie called charkuter, which are basically like a Swedish chessboard cookie. So you kind of make shortbread, you dye half of it with cocoa powder, you make it in a little intricate log and chill it, and then you just slice them and bake them. Delicious, very fun. So the cookbook is Crumbs by Ben Mims. It includes a lot of cookies that you've had versions of, and then a lot of cookies including like licorice meringues from Iceland that were completely new to me, and maybe not the first one I'm going to try. I don't have a lot of baking licorice on hand yet, but maybe that's where I'm headed thanks to this cookbook.
That cookbook sounds like Koisanip to me.
Well, apparently he's just signed a deal for global desserts. So there's another one coming in a couple years. Although I'm curious how dessert is going to be defined. Perhaps that will be part of the fun of the research. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan, for sitting in for Dana.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And Steve, great chatting.
Great chatting. Thanks.
And Kat, thank you for all your work and for your bonus endorsement.
Thank you so much.
You'll find links to some of the things we talked about today on our show page. That's slate.com/culturefest. And you can email us at culturefest@slate.com. Our introductory theme music is by the composer Nicholas Bertel. Our production assistant is Kat Hong. Our producer is Vic Whitley-Berry. For Steve Metcalf and Dan Coyce, I'm Julia Turner. Thanks so much for joining us.